The evidence is that the Gospels were written 20 to 60 years after the fact. The earliest fragment of a Gospel is the John Rylands fragment in the John Rylands Museum in Manchester, England. It's a fragment of the Gospel of John. It's dated between 117 and 138 AD. So that is 30 to 60 years after the writing of John, which is an incredibly short span of time. The early church fathers, Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, and Clement, Bishop of Rome, quote Matthew, Mark, and Luke in letters that they wrote in 95 and in 110 AD. So that is why I am convinced, the evidence is, the Gospels were written not 150 years after the fact. They were written in the first century, and obviously the eyewitnesses were around.
And how can you be even certain that even if they were written earlier,
right?
And back then they didn't have the translations we have, right, or even the way of transmitting information. We didn't have like the printing press. They had to transmit everything by hand. People had to copy them.
Yes.
At that time, people weren't that literate as we are today.
Correct.
So the translation, even with Aramaic, which is the language Jesus would have spoken, all the letters, all the Gospels written are in either Greek or Coptic, which are either the Egyptian language or the Greek language, which were the more popular ones at the time. So how can you be sure? Why isn't there anything written in Aramaic about Jesus? Why isn't there any historical account except for these Greek things that spread out that way more so than the other, for example?
You bet. Because Greek was the common trade language of that day. Undoubtedly, many Jews spoke Greek because it was the trade language of the day.
Right.
And so you're right. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were probably written in Greek, although there's a small possibility that Matthew was written in Aramaic. That's a possibility that an early church father alludes to. But we're not sure. But we have over 5,200 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript.
Not all of them are identical, though.
Correct. There are many variants.
So how can you be sure that the gospel, or at least the translation, which is a translation of a translation, at least the compilation of the Bible that we have today was written or was actually compiled in the year 360 AD. So that's even more so after the fact than what we know today. All the letters, perhaps there were even more letters. Perhaps letters were fabricated, perhaps. So how do you know? Why do you take it for on faith that these specific letters, these, 40-something letters, or books in general with the whole Bible, take it to be the absolute truth, even though it wasn't really, what we have today wasn't really existent until 360 years afterwards?
Okay, first point. We don't go from translation to translation to translation to translation. We go from the original Greek to English, the original Greek to Latin, the original Greek to French or Spanish. We have over 5,200 Greek manuscripts, and the New Testament was written in Greek. So we're not going through several different translations. We're going from Greek to English. Second point. The Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Pilate, the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Judas. Those Gospels were rejected at a fairly early date in the 2nd century because they were based on the philosophy of Gnosticism, which taught the physical is evil, the spiritual is good. Well, that comes right from Plato. The Greek Gnostics. Knowledge is key. The spirit is key. The physical is evil. And obviously, Jesus Christ contradicted that idea. And so does the Bible, because the Bible and Jesus insisted God created your body. It's a beautiful gift. Take care of it. And he also created your soul, your spirit, your personality. Take care of it. Now, what were the tests that were used to determine whether a New Testament document would be canonized, be part of the 27 New Testament books? 3 tests. First test, was it written by an apostle or by someone who knew an apostle? Second test, was it orthodox, meaning by that in agreement with the Torah, the Old Testament, and the apostolic oral tradition? And third test, was it used by the churches around the known world, around the Mediterranean, from Rome down to Alexandria, Egypt? If it met those 3 criteria, it was accepted into the New Testament canon.
So basically, the more popular, if it was lucky enough to be popular, then it would have been accepted, in other words. What if there was something? Why didn't Jesus actually write anything even?
I don't know why Jesus didn't write anything.
It's all
I don't know.
It's all faith then. Can I just?
No. You gotta be kidding me.
Yeah.
Just because someone doesn't write something doesn't mean it's all faith that I believe he existed.
You're taking it on the Bible that it actually existed, even though
Well,
the
yeah.
Bible claims to be eyewitness accounts, even though they were written several, even if it's decades, it's not an eyewitness account.
When you study U.S. history, do you necessarily study the letters of Abraham Lincoln or George Washington? Or do you read eyewitness testimony of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington?
Well, if I read the Epic of Gilgamesh, I don't really believe the guy actually fought with the dragon.
Because the literary style of the Epic of Gilgamesh is not historical narrative. That's why I don't accept it either as historical narrative.
So the Bible, as in historical narrative, would be Noah's flood, that
No.
Jonah was swallowed by a whale.
No.
Would that'd be historical narrative as well?
No, you don't read about Jesus next to Noah or Jonah. Instead, you read about Jesus in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, written in Greek in the first century by eyewitnesses. And when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll notice it's not once upon a time in the land of Nod. Winkin, Blinken, and Odd took Jesus on a boat ride. No, it does not read that way.
It does say that 3 kings came and bore him gifts.
Very good. No, they're not 3 kings.
3 wise men.
Thank you. 3 wise men came and offered gifts to Jesus. That's correct. Absolutely correct. That's historical, I would argue.
That they followed a star and the star led them. It doesn't seem all too historical as an account. And if you're basing it on the wording, then what's stopping people to make it to word it in a way that sounds historical instead of a tale, for example?
Well, when you read the Gospels, it does not have the literary style of epic poetry, like the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer. Instead, Luke chapter 3, in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias tetrarch of Abilene. During the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John. Well, who gives a rip about who's tetrarch and governor? Well, Luke did. Why? Because the evidence is Luke was a meticulous historian. He's not just ripping this stuff up off the wall and making this stuff up. He's a meticulous historian, and he's writing it as historical narrative.